Walk into a house built before 1950 and something feels off before you can explain why. It isn't the creaking floors. It isn't the smell of old wood and radiator dust. It's the small things. A little iron door down near the ground. A slot cut inside the medicine cabinet. A window turned sideways in an attic wall, like somebody installed it wrong and just left it. Here's the thing. Every single one of those details was put there on purpose. Somebody paid a carpenter to build it. Somebody used it every day of their life and never once thought it was unusual. And then the world quietly changed underneath them.
The feature stopped making sense, and we simply stopped building it. So today we're not doing a list. We're taking a walk. We'll start out at the curb,
go down into the cellar, move through the kitchen, climb the stairs, and finish up on the roof. 15 stops. Stay with me to the last one, because that one comes with a legend nobody has ever been able to prove. The little iron door near the ground. We haven't even reached the porch yet, and there it is. A cast iron hatch, maybe the size of a shoebox, set low into the foundation, painted over about 9 times. That was the coal chute. For roughly 70 years, this is how houses stayed warm. A truck pulled up. A man in a leather cap hauled a canvas sack onto his shoulder, opened that hatch, and poured black coal straight down a metal slide into a bin in your basement. He never stepped inside your house. He never even knocked. Then somebody in that family, usually whoever drew the short straw, went down every morning, shoveled coal into the furnace, and shook out the ashes. Cold mornings meant getting up before everyone else to feed the fire, so the house was livable by breakfast. Gas and oil heat ended all of it. No delivery, no shoveling, no ash, no black dust settling on the windowsills. The chute got bricked up, the bin became storage, and that little iron door became decoration that nobody can explain to their kids. The other little door, up by the kitchen. Now look higher, closer to the back door. A second small hatch, this one usually wood or tin, with a door on the outside and a matching door on the inside. That was the milk door. Before home refrigeration was reliable, milk didn't keep. It had to arrive fresh, often daily, sometimes before sunrise. So the milkman opened the outer hatch, set the cold glass bottles inside, took the empties you'd left there the night before, and moved on to the next house. Nobody was woken up. Nobody unlocked a door. Some of these compartments were insulated, some were lined with tin. A few of the fancier ones had a little bell inside, so you'd hear the delivery land. What people miss about it isn't the milk, it's the trust. A stranger opened a hatch into your home at 5 in the morning, and that was completely normal. Today, we install cameras to watch a box get left on the porch. The toilet standing alone in the basement, down the cellar stairs, and there it is. A toilet, just sitting in the open. No walls, no door, no privacy whatsoever. Sometimes a bare drain in the concrete beside it and a hose hanging from a nail. People call it the Pittsburgh Potty, though you'll find them all over the old steel and coal towns. The logic was simple, and it was about dignity, not plumbing. A man came home from the mill or the mine covered in soot, grease, and metal dust. He was not walking that through his wife's front room, so he came in the basement door, stripped down, used that toilets, sat low in the line so sewer backups flooded the concrete. Either way, it's one of the most honest pieces of design in American housing. Zero comfort, total purpose. The cupboard that breathed. Back up in the kitchen. Open that tall, narrow cabinet in the corner. Notice the shelves are slatted instead of solid, and there's a small screened vent at the top and another at the bottom. That was a cooling cupboard. Out west they called it a California cooler. It ran on nothing at all. Cool outside air was drawn in through the low vent, moved up past the produce, and warm air escaped out the top. No electricity, no motor, no repair bill. Onions, potatoes, squash, apples, and hard cheese lived in there for weeks. Every good cook knew exactly which shelf was coldest and stored accordingly. That was ordinary kitchen knowledge, the way we know which burner runs hot. Then the electric refrigerator arrived and made all of it unnecessary in about a decade. Most of these cupboards got their vents sealed shut and became a place to keep cereal boxes. They still work, by the way. That's the funny part. Nobody wants them, but they still work. The kitchen that wasn't in the house. Step out the back door. See that small building 20 feet from the house, the one everybody assumes was a shed. That was the summer kitchen. Cooking on a wood or coal stove in July turned a house into an oven. So families built a second kitchen outside and moved the whole operation out there from roughly May to September. All the canning happened there. All the bread. All the enormous harvest meals. Meanwhile, the main house stayed maybe 15 degrees cooler and actually livable. There was a safety reason too. Kitchen fires were the leading way houses burned down. Put the fire in a separate building. Fires were the women worked out there together for entire afternoons, put up hundreds of jars and talked the whole time. The work was brutal and the company was the payment. Air conditioning killed the summer kitchen completely. Most of the survivors are storing lawnmowers today. The brass whistle in the wall. Back inside, on the wall near the dining room, there's a small brass fitting with a hinged cap. Looks like an old drain plug. Most people paint right over it. That was a speaking tube. You popped the cap, blew into it, and a little whistle sounded at the far end. Then you pulled the whistle out and just talked. Your voice traveled the pipe and came out the other side. No wires, no power, no monthly fee. It worked during storms, blackouts, and everything else because it was literally just a hole in the house. Wealthy homes had them, ships had them, so did fire stations. Electric intercoms replaced them, then telephones replaced those, and now we text someone who's sitting one floor above us. Somehow that's progress. The hatch in the hallway wall. There's a small hinged door in the upstairs hall, about waist high, opening into a smooth metal shaft that drops straight down into darkness. The laundry chute. Understand what laundry meant back then. It meant hauling armloads of dirty clothes down 2 or 3 flights of stairs in the dark while carrying a lamp. The chute erased that job entirely. Open the door, drop it in, and gravity handled the rest. The clothes landed in a basket in the cellar right beside the wash tub. Kids loved them, which is exactly the reason they disappeared. Every family had at least one story about a child who decided to test whether the chute was person size. Fire codes noticed too, since an open shaft between floors moves smoke beautifully. Add that most modern homes put the laundry room upstairs anyway, and the chute lost its whole reason to exist. Custom builders still install them on request. People who grew up with one never forget it. The cabinet that unfolded into a table. Open that skinny door in the hallway, the one that's too narrow to be a closet. Inside, mounted flat against the back, is a full-length padded ironing board on a hinge. Pull it down and it locks level. Fold it up and the door closes flush with the wall. Some had a little shelf for starch and a rack for the cord. This existed because ironing wasn't a chore, it was an era. Cotton and linen wrinkled if you looked at them wrong. Shirts, sheets, tablecloths, and handkerchiefs all got pressed. Ironing day was a fixed part of the week, same as wash day. A folding board built into the wall saved a woman from dragging a heavy wooden board out of a closet several times a week. Permanent press fabrics arrived and quietly deleted the entire ritual. The cabinets stayed. Walk through a 1920s house and you'll still find them, usually stuffed with brooms. The tiny elevator. At the end of the hall, another mystery panel. Behind it, a wooden box on ropes running between floors. The dumbwaiter. In big houses, the kitchen was often in the basement, well away from the dining room. So smells and heat and noise stayed out of the family's space, which created an obvious problem. How do you get a hot roast up 2 floors without ruining it or killing the person carrying it? You put it in a box and pull a rope. Counterweights did most of the work. Dishes went up, empty plates came down, and nobody had to climb anything. Hotels and restaurants used them constantly. Some still do. In houses with staff, the dumbwaiter was also a kind of silent language. Food arrived, dishes vanished, and the family never saw the person doing it. That invisibility was the entire point of the design. Most surviving dumbwaiters got sealed or converted into linen closets. The window above the door. Look up. Above the door frame there's a small horizontal window, hinged at the bottom, sometimes with a brass rod for pushing it open. That's a transom. It solved two problems that don't exist anymore. Interior rooms and hallways had no daylight, so the transom borrowed light from the room next door. And with no air conditioning, houses needed air to actually move. So you opened the transoms, hot air escaped along the ceiling, and cooler air pulled through from below. Boarding houses used them so you could keep your door locked and still get airflow at night. Air conditioning and electric light retired the transom. Fire codes finished the job, since an open glass gap over every door isn't ideal when things are burning. They survive because they're beautiful. That's the only reason left, and it's enough. Quick question before we keep going. How many of these have you actually seen in person? Say the number in the comments. I'm curious, how many of you grew up in a house like this one? The slot inside the medicine cabinet. Bathroom now. Open the mirrored cabinet and look at the back wall. There's a narrow slot in the metal, about 2 inches wide. No label, no explanation. That's where used razor blades went. Men shaved with double-edged safety razors and changed blades constantly. Those blades are genuinely dangerous, sharp on both sides, thin enough to slice through a paper trash bag, and a real hazard to whoever emptied the bin. So the solution was to drop them into that slot. The blade fell into the hollow space between the studs and disappeared. Nobody planned for what came next. There was no bin, no collection, no way to retrieve them, which means thousands of houses across the country have decades of rusted razor blades piled inside the walls. Open up a bathroom wall in a house from the 30s and out pours a small metal avalanche. 60 years of shaving, still sitting there in the dark. If your house is old enough, this is happening inside your bathroom wall right now. You just have no reason to know it. The porch you slept on upstairs. A door leads out to a screened porch off the bedroom. There's no furniture on it now. There used to be beds. The sleeping porch was a serious health measure, not a novelty. Tuberculosis was everywhere, and doctors were convinced that fresh air, day and night, in every season, was the best defense. People slept out there through the fall, through winter in some places, under piles of wool blankets, with snow blowing against the screens because the doctor said so and nobody argued with the doctor. There was a practical payoff too. Before air conditioning, an upstairs bedroom in August was unbearable. The porch caught whatever breeze existed. Whole hospitals were designed around the same belief. Patients were wheeled onto open-air terraces in winter, wrapped up like packages, because sunlight and cold air were considered treatment. Antibiotics ended the medical argument, and central air ended the comfort argument. But anyone who actually slept on one will tell you they never slept better in their life. The strange niche on the staircase. Coming back down, look at the landing where the stairs turn. There's a shallow arched alcove carved into the wall, just deep enough for a vase. The old name for it is a coffin corner. The story goes like this. Staircases were narrow and turned sharply, and people died at home in their own beds, upstairs. Carrying a coffin down those stairs meant pivoting it around a tight corner, so builders cut a notch into the wall to give the pallbearers room to swing. Architectural historians mostly agree these niches were decorative, built for statues, candles, or flowers, and the coffin explanation got attached later because it's a better tale. But here's what makes it linger. The underlying fact is completely real. People did die at home, and families did carry them down those exact stairs. The legend survives because the world that made it possible was real. The button in the Newel post. Right at the bottom of the stairs, look at the big post that anchors the railing. On top, there's a small disc set into the wood. Ivory, bone, or mother of pearl. The tradition says the Newel post was hollow. When the family made the final payment on the house, the deed was rolled up, dropped inside, and the hole was capped with that button, paid in full, sealed into the structure of the home itself. Some versions say a lit candle was placed on the post the night the mortgage cleared, so the whole street could see it. Historians will tell you the evidence is thin and it's mostly folklore, especially in New England. Plenty of Newel posts are solid. Plenty of buttons are just a plug, covering a bolt, and yet people still pry them open, hoping, because owning your home outright was the biggest thing that could happen to a family, and it deserved a monument, the crooked window in the gable. Last stop, step outside, walk to the end of the driveway, and look up at the second floor. There's a window turned at a 45-degree angle, tilted to match the slope of the roof. It looks like a mistake nobody corrected. In Vermont, they call it a witch window. The folklore is wonderful. A witch flies on a broomstick flies straight, and a witch cannot pass through a crooked window. Glass was expensive, and windows were standard sizes. Rather than pay for a custom window, the builder took the one he already had and turned it sideways until it fit. That's it. That's the whole secret. Somebody was being thrifty. 200 years later, we call it magic. _outro. 15 stops, and every one tells you the same thing from a different angle. These features weren't charming, they were answers. Somebody was cold, so they built a chute. We lost them because the problems they solved got solved another way. That's not sad exactly, but it does mean 100 years from now, someone will walk through the house you live in right now and have no idea what half of it was for. So tell me, which of these 15 did your childhood home actually have, and which one do you wish was still standard in houses today? Drop it in the comments. I raid them all, and the stories you leave are usually better than the ones I bring you. If this walk was worth your time, hit like, subscribe, and send it to somebody who grew up in an old house. They'll recognize every single stop. Thanks for walking through it with me.